Okay, blam, okay, blam, okay, blam, okay. And we are here to continue our journey with Riepel. Okay, so this is the sound of the keyboard. I will put it into perfect. Let's continue our journey with Riepel, and at that time we stop this point. So let's continue after this example of this piano without a major repetition. Pa pa pum pa pa pum pum pa, fa sol fa mi re mi fa sol re mi re fa mi rum pum pum pa pum pam, sol la la fa mi re sol sol fa mi la sol sol mi re do fa mi re fa mi sol 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 so fa mi re do do. In short, and many thousands. In short, many thousands ways. But now I notice that the alla breve style here, in the common time style, it would certainly sound more lively. Nevertheless, whoever would want to have the alla breve style more lively than singing could actually arrange the bass viola and second violin for this. You are right, for the accompaniment can enliven things throughout at one pleasure. I usually do it, in general, this way. And so we have the accompaniment of the other instruments. So the bass and the viola. And the two upper voices with syncopation. Or with the bass more lively, so this way. And this principle. The Starter, however, calls the one as well as the other a drum bass. It's not very bright. However, to give each of the four voices from time to time a different animation is generally not counterpoint. A different animation is generally not counterpoint, but merely gives a lively effect here and there. Example, so general animation probably is talking about these repeating notes. Now we'll see. So, and the bass, pom 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 pom, okay, is changing the octave, and the viola this way. Then the violin, the second violin, and the soprano with syncopation. Or, as you can see in the second example, there's something working in the opposite way, because the leaping voices now are in the viola, and because we are on a 3/5 harmony, but starting on G in the viola is doing this. Then there are repetition in the soprano in the first violin, and syncopation in the second violin. So they are passing this way, and this way. or the bass is given its own melody for a while. Okay, so the bass can even have its own melody. While the other upper three voices are playing syncopations or better. And this way. Or still more clearly. Why more clearly? Because the viola, as you can see, it's doubling the bass an octave higher. This way. Good. However, I do not mean that the bass has a melody right at the beginning, but that such a melody can also be incorporated and expanded several times in the middle of an allegro. Notice here that the open A string of the viola is an octave higher than the open A string of the cello, right? Because cello 1, 2, 3, and 4, the viola 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that the cello A is an octave higher in turn than the contrabass. Yes, indeed. Very important thing. Here you may say, but the cello is crossing the viola. Right, but remember that there's another contrabasso, another double bass, you would say, o violone, which is playing another octave down. So it doesn't matter to cross the viola, because at the end there's another voice, the contrabasso, the double bass, play the bass part, which is playing in real notes an octave down. So we don't get the 4/6 effect. Now, it says, a short or small-bodied instrument certainly seems actually to produce a lower pitch, right? A short or small-bodied instrument certainly seems actually to produce a lower pitch. One observes this with a transverse flute. One may, however, sometimes allow even the violins in the higher register to go in unison with a bass singing voice or a bassoon. Indeed, however, one can better bring out the effect. The organ has quint and octave registers, the fifth, so the sesquialtera. That is why a few years ago, a musical Frenchman said to me, "Everything in between makes wind. A fat belly makes you sloppy." I asked him, however, whether the outer voices might be covered up by the filling out of the middle voices. So I asked him, however, whether the outer voices might be covered up by the filling out of the middle voices. With that, he was gone. Okay, then 129 is saying it's not very bright. Let's see why. I will express my opinion about such unfolded and childish insults in the chapter on bass. If that, however, does not please the Urbstatter, he may stay with his own opinion, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, accordingly, the contrabass is grandfather to the viola. Now, for just that reason, I should have set the viola, in the last example, an octave lower, in order to see more in unison with the bass. Here, the viola, as you can see now, is an octave lower. So, in true unison. The violas could certainly also play in the upper octave here. Okay, because they can play here. I have observed this almost every time in an adagio. When the bass has a clause, an imitation, or its own melody, only when the violins are set strongly enough and are undivided can the viola, as before, go into the upper octaves, because in that way it cuts through the bass and helps it to rise. I have observed this almost every time in an adagio. Let's see what. When the bass has a clause, and so a cadence, an imitation, or its own melody, only when the violins are set strongly enough and are undivided can the viola, as before, go into the upper octave? Because in that way it cuts through the bass and helps it to rise. Okay. It is true that as soon as the violins have a rest, one hears the violas in the upper register. That it is true that as soon as the violins have a rest, one hears the violas in the upper register and the contrabasses in the lower register, in the lower singing together. True, because if the violin have a rest, like daughter and father. Okay, without the mother, which is saying anything. I have noticed that more than once in passing. I have noticed that more than than once in passing. But why haven't you used the fifth G in the harmony of either of the two examples just previous to the last given? So why haven't you used a fifth G in the harmony of either of the two examples just previous to the last given? And in the last one, I don't see one single use of the third E. I would rather feel it out beautifully as I learned to do on the harpsichord, for example. Let's see. Ah, this fifth. It's not writing. Okay. This fifth. Pum, 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 pum. Pum, 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 or that G here at the right. Come on, what's happening today? Okay. If I were you, I would write it that way too. However, by means of such filling out, the melody or effect often is only more hind-read. Another time I will say it differently, but the young man should not be confused by that. The Dorians, Phrygians, etc., usually wrote full chords. Did they have chords? I don't think so. But it is now a different work. You cannot return to that one. In time, you will increasingly see, to your astonishment, just how empty one frequently makes a setting these days. Nevertheless, one piece is not like one other. Consequently, also one composer is not like another. For that reason, I do not look down upon your two examples at all, but I want to have merely told you that a bass melody is clear and pleasing just to the extent that the inner parts are shallow and empty. That a bass melody, I want to have merely told you that a bass melody is clear and pleasing and pleasing just to the extent that the inner parts are shallow and empty. This is why I have often wondered from whence this my little thing, the viola, should obtain the power to reinforce the bass so much by playing in unison. Certainly, three voices are perceived more clearly than four, and two are more pleasing than three. Must one therefore always write the two violins stoutly? Must one therefore always write the two violins stoutly in unison and also have the viola and bass go together likewise? Be careful. It is not a rule, but it can only occasionally be that way for the sake of the effect. 3 years ago, the Chapelmeister in Opolisburg had to compose an opera in haste. He composed the last aria so hurriedly that he did not think of the effect. But this very aria had the greatest effect, much to everyone's and his surprise, such a great man. From that, it is to be concluded that no one is done learning. Namely, from your story, the rule is simply to be drawn that one must search for the effect as long as one lives. Now, seriously, we have been writing notes long enough. We now want to chat a bit more together. Your chattering is keeping me from my lunch. It is actually, as I see, already 2 in the afternoon. I'm not yet hungry. Day or no day, day or no day. The instructor always says I must finally show my colors, that the chapelmeister does not fill out enough but uses only 2 voices in many musical pieces, namely the 2 violins in unison and the violas with the basses also in unison. The Urbstatter doesn't know why that happens. The chapelmaster will gladly forgive him, for it provided that he recognize it, or at least when he thinks about it. For that which is a rule at one time can be contrary to the rules another time. He says that the chapelmeister writes only Shenseshi songs, and if one has the rule, one could make a soup of it. But I do not understand the word senteshi. Me too. I do not understand it too. By the sound of it, it is certainly taken from the Italian word cencio. What the fuck? It's a change is another thing. Cencio. Rubbish, rag or ragged. But cencio to cenci. Okay. There's a big difference in writing, actually. Such as is offered for sale at the flea market. Now, notice now how offensive and insulting it sounds. True. However, I have already noticed that the pitiful Hofstadter is merely a rule composer. Thus, he writes nothing more than vain ABCs. He doesn't even know that the rules themselves are invented in the course of composition and furthermore are continuously revised. I must say more to this cantist that I can answer for in order to make him immune to the Hofstadter. Therefore, I will consider absolutely nothing to the discantist in the chapter on counterpoint. Okay. I know other similar upstart heroes who wants to force and obligate people to their bad taste, that is, to their ABC rules. One or another even believes that an injustice has been done and even dies over it. In fact, one could not dream of anything crazier. Why not rather live and yet live? You are right, the Hubstarter is now making every effort possible to make a soup of broth of these rules, but it will no longer align the back with the front. He himself now puts so many drum basses one after the other that one becomes bored with it. Therefore, many recognize that. When they hear the Hubstarter's compositions played for 3 hours on end, they become ill. When, however, they hear at last just a single aria by the chapelmaster, they become well again. From that I conclude that I ought not to compose what is pleasing to such a rule-bound composer, because he cannot give me any bread, but rather must look for his bread himself. He has recently said, Hans Mikkel, to learning the difficult keys with sharps and flats at the keyboard. That's a good idea. Let's see how much is going to. Okay, examples. We want examples. That is a good idea. Therefore, after one can compose in the easier keys, such as C, D, E, F, G, A, and B flat, with less difficulty. Hans Mikkel, however, now no longer wants to play or compose in the easy keys. In that way, he has been led into nothing but artifice. Or it may be a question of talent. His beard may have already grown over and over again because of this, and yet he is still so childish. For if any doubts should arise, he claims to know better than anyone else. Not even his master, the Hubstatter himself, may speak, and when, from time to time, I must look over something and correct it, he invariably says, yes, that is just how I wanted to make it. If, however, a stranger arrives unexpectedly, heavens, he startles and is struck dumb. He puts away his compositions in a twinkling and begins to explain his own rules to me, just as if his extraordinary intelligence or deeply rooted arrogance would help him out. I take this as a compliment, for he thinks I am blind. One, three, four. Where is it? One, three, that is not new in the world. I would certainly benefit such a man if he would recite 30 or 40 times a day the following little verse. If foolishly you are ashamed to learn, you will remain a barbarian. But just keep on but just keep on going, for you can learn more that way than from many a master. I am never ashamed to ask others openly for their resolution to a problem. It has more often hurt me that I was not able to succeed in that. How happy I was about 14 years ago when a rather solid composer, a really upright and harmonious soul, explained one and another unequivocal principle to me in a just few hours. Prior to that, most composers had given me nothing but a mocking answer and then sent me back with my questions only even more confused than before. Soon one of them asked whether I were in a position to pay for such costly lessons. Then another teacher advised me to give up composition entirely. This seems something happening nowadays, yeah? To give up composition entirely, since it was too difficult for me and everything else that such despicable braggarts say. 135. We cannot all do everything. Whoever knows me knows it. I accept anything gladly when someone does me a good deed. For that reason, I have always tried, ever since, to revenge, namely, in that I expose and share with beginners, as much or as little as I have picked up here and there. That revenge is also useful to me. I thank you heartily for it. I thank you heartily for it. There is, as my Lord said, no man without faults, only that the faults of each are different from the others. A half-grown orator in our Opolis book recently tried to maintain that in front of a Latin class in the great lecture hall. Half-grown orator, a good orator, or rather a desert. Ora pan orator desertus aut potius desertus. Okay, a good orator, or rather a desert. Because it's a riddle. Orator desertus, but desertus and desertus. So let's say in German doesn't make sense, but desertus, desertus, they are totally different. Good, desertus, desert, desertus. So in order to say a good orator doesn't say anything, says nothing. But he carried on about it so arrogantly that nearly all of his listeners left. Only I alone was so stupid as to remain until the end. Even now I cannot get many of these uncountable sentences out of my head. There is an infinite number of fools, but there are so many types of their insanity that neither folly nor laziness can redirect the progression of foolishness. The one who deems himself wiser is an idiot or lacking in judgment. Indeed, he will be considered the wisest of all who recognizes his own different kinds of stupidity, and who tries to dispel silly ghosts, since he who knows much understands little. He who knows much understands little, etc. Okay. Perhaps it started the truth too obviously. We want to write some more notes for a while, for something has occurred to me. You brought a little cesura or comma on the fifth or the tonic in order to arrive to the sixth degree more easily. Okay, and so now another bunch of examples are starting with this main topic, which is you want to write some more notes. So you wrote a little cesura comma on the fifth of the tonic, on the fifth of the tonic, in order to arrive at the 6th degree more easily. But then let's play this, but we will explore in the next video. And this will be the topic of the next video. The next video, this time we played only a few examples, but now we have much more examples to play from the next video of this journey. See you. Okay. Fa, mi, re, mi, fa, sol, do. Okay. Now we can continue. Let's continue our journey with Riepel. In this video, we are going to talk about a new bunch of examples. So I'll talk about a modulation to the 6th degree. Why? Because he's saying you wrote a little cesura or comma on the fifth of the tonic. So the tonic C, the fifth is G, in order to arrive at the 6th degree more easily. Okay, let's see. So the fifth is G, so the cesura comma. Now we are starting the new section. Bum, 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 bum. This is so it's actually it's one example. I don't know why he's writing. So the editor is right. The modern editor is writing beginning of the second part of an allegro in C, because this should be put here at the end, because this is just a continuation. So it's one single example. The etc. is on here. So this is the beginning of the second part of an allegro after the cadence to the on the 5th degree of the tonic. So G. Pam pam pa pa ma fa sol mi fa sol la so fa mi fa la fa do ti do fa la sol fa mi re. And then it continues so that we have the shift med, the comma to the A minor, 6 degree. One can also go all at once, likewise from G to A, that is from the 5th to the 6th degree, as my Lord did. Let's see this example of the Lord. True, which is a very beautiful monte. I already know that seconds in direct succession are not much good. On the other hand, these two measures are in A are, with respect to the previous two measures in G, merely a repetition. On account of the bass, at least, it means nothing. For if a minuet begins in C and the first half ended in the fifth. Okay, let's see. On account of the bass, at least, it means nothing. For if a minuet began in C and the first half ended in the fifth. Octave G. Two octaves would follow each other. Between the violins and the bass, by means of the repetition according to my Lord, namely from the last G and the return to the opening C. And if a minuet began with the fifth degrees and ended the first half with the fifth degree changing comma, two successive fifths would result. Let's see. These two fifths, the first fifth and the last fifth, so that in the repetition we have two parallel fifths. Thus repetition must necessarily be the reason why, in the end of a greater part of the word, would hear such two forbidden fifths and octaves rather than an artful fugue. Thus repetition must necessarily be the reason why, in the end of a greater part of the word, in the end, a greater part of the word, not in the end of a great, but in the end, a greater part of the word would hear such two forbidden fifths and octaves rather than an artful fugue. If that is so, then it can be the same with the second, although it is a dissonance. This mature observation on the part of my Lord could often be of good use to me. Certainly better is better. One could certainly arrange a minuet quite differently, and if I knew that, for example, the Ubstatter did not like the direct series of seconds, I would simply use the following type of changing comma. Changing comma, let's see. Okay, changing comma where there is a cross. So instead of this and now we have one could perhaps prepare the second degree A, if needs be, with a 7th degree passing tone. One could perhaps prepare the second degree A, if needs be, with a 7th degree passing tone, so this way, like a little pick-up bit. pick up half beat. The single little raised tone, marked with a cross in the previous example, so this one, should give you to know correctly that one could go also in the following way, from the 5th to the 6th degree. So this is what happens. G is the note of the bass, and then here becomes G sharp. Or by means of the accompaniment. Okay, now we have the accompaniment. Let's see. And okay, by means of the accompaniment, so as you can see, pam pa pa pam pam pam. Now this melody is spread because pam pa pa pam pam pa pa pam. Then it continues tan tan ta 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 ta, and this G sharp in the middle now is given in the bass, in the viola, let's say. And then this scale, fa la sol fa mi re, fa la sol fa mi re, is in the melody. So let's play with the bass. Okay. No. Pa, bum, bum. Example 633, or for example, let's see. So that we have G, 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 instead of being in the middle, now it's in the true bass with only one voice in the bass. Or more quickly into the 6th degree if one pleases. And that's very quick. And that's a very good thing to move to a monte and to move to E minor, because we are now on C. And then we have finished on B, creating a little monte, and then E minor section. For example. Then this last example here seems a bit too fast or too artificial to me, indeed, because it requires another section. Be that as it may, these several remarks will be worth a lot to me in all future transitions. Now I like it well that you can see into your Lord so deeply. Thus we want to examine the 6th Symphony a little bit. I can do that at leisure at home, since my Lord certainly has more than 200 symphonies. Nevertheless, give it to me. Look, this master actually goes to the 3rd degree. This master actually goes to the 3rd degree. I will just transcribe it quickly, beginning in the middle. So 3rd degree means in E minor. Okay. Let's play this example. I should move the keyboard actually more at the right, because, okay. That's a very common thing to end on the third degree. Fa, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, fa, because re, do, fa, the connection to the first degree C major is very close. Sol, fa, fa, pi, la, sol, fa, mi, re, mi, do, sol, 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 fa, mi, re, mi, sol, 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 la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. You already know he could have turned from the third degree, E, back to the tonic, at will by means of the fonte or ponte. Yes, because fonte because with if we finish on E, fonte this way, or ponte, ponte, it depends how you want to do it. Let's see if there is an example after. I've shown this Merlin brief here in the 7th Symphony. He makes a comma on the 3rd degree E, which belongs to the 6th degree A. He makes a comma on the 3rd degree E, which belongs to the 6th degree A. So it means E major as the 5th degree of A minor, probably. Let's see. Ah, yes, that's a converging cadence to E, but here E is the 5th degree of A. And then bum bum bum. Okay, in that case, that E is the 5th degree of must be conceived as a 5th degree of A, so converging cadence. I've merely added the second violin at the piano. The composer, as you see, gives the same notes to the violas and symphony, and violas, and simply lets the second violin fill in. Let the second violin fill in. I see that well. I only wonder about such a strange comma on the 3rd degree, E, because the theme immediately begins again in the tonic, as at the beginning. I have as yet heard that in no symphony. Since this comma segment is extended only to the 6th degree A, it allows no other miniature than this, C, G, A, and C. Okay, such a comma segment could also have been formed in the following or in another way. Let's see. Sol, fa, pam, pam, pam. So that fa, mi. So in a shorter way at the end. 1, 2, 3, and 4 bars. 1, 2. No. Okay. 1, 2, 3, and 4 bars. They're still the same bars, the same amount of bars. But the difference is that here, this part remains the same. Pam, pa, pa, pam, pam. But instead of repeating, let's say, this section 2 times, we have the first section the same. Pa, pam, 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 pa. Instead of the repetition, tan, 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 it's ending with the 5th comma. So this section is different. Okay. This idea ought also to find a place sometimes in a concerto when one lets the tutti end with the changing comma and the solo begins in the tonic, or perhaps the other way around. But I'm surprised no less that with the previous example from the 60th Symphony, since the composer actually closed with a cadence on the 3rd degree E and uses 6 A merely as a transition. But I'm surprised no less that with the previous example from the Sixth Symphony, since the composer actually closed with a cadence on the third degree E and used the 6A merely as a transition. Therefore, one must construct the tonal order in miniature as follows. Quite naturally, but among 100 symphonies, you will find scarcely one with the third degree this way. Also, you will soon hear 40 concertos and violin solos with the sixth degree before you would with the sixth degree. So concerto 40 concertos and violin solos with the sixth before you would hear one with the third degree. For concerto style structure is rather this: C, G, A, C. I know it because it's the most natural. Fugue style structure is, however, just as previously in the Sixth Symphony, namely thus. So it says that the fugue structures follows this one. Does Fuchs use this structure for the fugues in his Manuductio? Certainly. He seems also to prescribe it as a rule. Just look at page 126, first line. In Latin, however, on page 146, line 22. I will show you both of them in succession in miniature. Let's see. So, C major, G major, E minor, and then C major. Indeed, on the other hand, concerto standard so we have the same cadences, except for the third one, which is E minor and A minor. Is one not allowed to all? Is one not allowed at all to go to the sixth degree in a fugue? Is one not allowed at all to go to the sixth degree in a fugue? Yes, indeed. Fuchs himself has an example in the Manuductio, in the Latin on page 244, in the Kyrie from Missa Vicissitudini, in the German page 46, where he makes a cadence on the sixth degree and not on the third. I have also heard, seen, and even possessed similar fugues with the sixth degree, but by famous masters. However, many use the third degree as well as the sixth degree in order to prolong the fugue at will. So basically saying with a cadence to E followed by another cadence to A, you make it longer. Or with a sixth degree first and third degree afterwards. So the cadence to A and then cadence to E. Okay, just as good. Thus, may I, if I wish, also use the second and fourth degrees, at least as transitions. Those may I, if I wish, also use the second and fourth degrees at least as transitions. Not only as transition, but you can even form cadences in both these two keys. Only one out not remain in them so long that the tonic is forgotten. Better still, now I would like to imagine that if I want to prolong a fugue quite long, so that I could present together in a miniature all the degrees belonging to the tonic. Let's see. Okay, from this point, there are still other examples because it's becoming very long, this section. Let's play this. So we have C, G, E, A, F, D, and C, all the degrees. Now the fifth degree G always stands as the first immediately after the tonic. But can these four, namely A, E, and F and D, be mixed up in 24 different ways? Without doubt. And in the middle of a fugue, the fifth degree can be mixed in with the others at will. So that you have five, namely G, A, E, F, D, which can mix up in 120 different ways. I actually knew that from the table of numbers. But further, since a fugue can partake the concerto style structure, a concerto, on the other hand, can partake a few style structure now and then. Moreover, I suddenly remember now that I myself have already heard a horn concerto as well as a trumpet concerto with the third degree instead of the sixth. The first of these concludes its second solo in E, somewhat like this. And then violins, etc., tutti. And the other, namely, for the trumpet, thus. Tutti. In case I were to stretch an allegro or fa concerto exceedingly long, perhaps even with four principal solo sections, since one of them usually has only three, my first solo will begin in C and then modulate to G, whereupon the first middle tutti or middle forte would come in it. The second solo would start in G and then modulate to A, where the second middle tutti would come in. The third solo would have to begin there in A and move to E, namely to the third middle tutti, after which I would begin the fourth or last solo in this key of E and go from there to the tonic conclusion in C, or else the last solo could immediately begin in C after the penultimate middle tutti. The fugal structure for such a long elaboration would perhaps be just as good. C, G, E, A, C. But he's saying, wait a moment, he's saying G, C, G, A, E, and C. Or else the last solo could immediately begin in C after the penultimate middle tutti. The fugal structure for the concerto structure is C, G, E, A, C, the concerto structure, and the fugal structure. For such a long elaboration would perhaps be just as good. Yesterday I heard the allegro of a new concerto in which the first solo began properly in C, moved to a cadence in G. But this is another topic is going to start, and we will analyze this in the next video. Okay, so we can conclude in a good point. Perfect. So in the next video we're going to talk about this modulation in a concerto style. Okay. One second. Okay, here we are. New water. Hello Musici, let's continue our journey with Riepel, and we stopped here in this section where we are analyzing some allegros and the modulations within the an allegro movement, where there is a solo and a tutti. In the last video we analyzed this element, this paragraph. Now let's continue. Preceptor. Yesterday I heard the allegro of a new concerto in which the first solo began properly in C and moved to a cadence in G. So it begins in C and moved to a cadence in G. Then the middle tutti began properly in G, but without a cadence. So the middle tutti began properly in G, but without a cadence. Let's see. Pam pam pa pam pam pa pom pam pom pa pom. So in which the first solo began properly in C. So the first solo is see, this seems to be A, more than C. Let me see. In which the first solo began properly in C and moved to a cadence to G. Then the middle tutti began, properly in G here. The middle tutti is beginning here, but without a cadence. So there's no cadence, just a little comma. And then there's the second solo joining in A minor. And this section is very weird. I don't like it. Thus, the composer began the second solo not in the fifth degree, but likewise in the sixth. Amazing. From there, he returned and began the third solo in the tonic C with the minor third, although he ended as it's proper in the same key with the major third. The structure did not seem bad to me for a change, but it seems too strange and unnatural to most listeners. I myself would almost prefer the fugue style. In it, one can perhaps trick the ear by presenting the key of E as the third degree of a while and afterwards form, nevertheless, a cadence of the sixth degree on A, or the other way around, by all means, certainly in all the possible variations. By all means, and certainly in all the combinations variations. As long as you don't up and nature by doing it. Might I not also write a principal solo in the fourth degree at times? Certainly that can often occur, especially if one is presented with a difficult key. E major, both sixth and third degrees go too far into the crosses sharps in the accompaniment. So with, especially if you're playing with the Mienton, those temperaments is very strange. And in that way, one can choose to place rather more convenient notes in the accompaniment because I would not gladly omit the sixth degree from a concerto. Thus, I will use the fourth degree as well as the second, for the most part, only in passing. The third, however, necessarily yet very sparingly. I have there a symphony in which the composer brings in the entire theme in the fourth degree toward the end, so that at the conclusion the tonic is mistaken for the fifth degree of the fourth, and the fourth itself for the tonic. For that reason, it sounds very offensive. So I have here a symphony, let's see, in which the composer brings in the entire theme in the fourth degree toward the end, so that at the conclusion the tonic is mistaken for the fifth degree of the fourth, and the fourth itself, so that at the conclusion the tonic, so the tonic of the conclusion, the tonic is mistaken for the fifth degree of the fourth. The fifth degree of the fourth. So let's say we are in C major. The fifth degree of the fourth. F major, okay. And the fourth itself for the tonic. For that reason, it sounds very offensive. Okay. I agree with that because the fourth degree is always softer, weicher, than the tonic, mollis. How would it be, however, if one abruptly moved too forcefully to the fourth? In that case, one would have to prepare for the tonic again and sharp it one by 1 degree. Imagine that I had already traveled around in the fourth degree, of which I will meanwhile set the last measure, and then I would return to the tonic by means of a sharp. In that case, one would have to prepare for the tonic again and sharp it by 1 degree. Okay. Imagine that I had already traveled around in the fourth degree, of which I will meanwhile set down the last measures, and then I would return to the tonic by means of a sharp. Okay, for E is harder and sharper than C. This. Sol, fa mi re, and then it continues. I feel it quite well, since F was too soft. The ear must be brought back to its senses by means of the sharp of the key E. And if one has gone somewhat too far into a sharp key, must one therefore go to a key with 1 degree softer than the tonic. So because F is too soft, you have to use a very sharp key in contrast. And if one has gone somewhat too far into a sharp key, we must therefore go into a key with 1 degree softer than the tonic, right? Compensation. Without a doubt, this is also a good way to prepare again for the tonic after one has at once pleasures modulated into foreign keys by means of chromatic harmonies. And that is what I prefer to do. Now I know how to handle the fourth degree. However, out I to use the second degree essentially never. And why not? Fuchs has it even in the Missa Vicissitudinis, namely at measure 46, and in the Latin version at page 244. For the Kyrie is itself in F, and he makes a cadence on G in the middle, with which G is counting from F the second degree. Since one can thus use all these keys within the octave with a single exception of the seventh degree, it is all the easier to take apart or dissect the theme, for I have heard many concertos in which 1, 2, or 3, or 4 measures tutti between the solos are constructed out of the theme, so that one can scarcely detect the principal solo. We have page 96. We have a concerto at home in which a complete antithesis is not inserted into the theme, but rather only in the last measure of it during the solo. My lord has procured recently yet another concerto in which only the beginning of the second measure of the same theme is always heard in unison in such a form. I will give you a sample of it. Theme or initial tutti. My lord has procured recently yet another concerto in which only the beginning of the first measure of the theme, is always heard in unison in such a form. Theme or initial tutti. Okay. So the beginning of the first measures, which means this part. Now, as mentioned, he presents the 5 notes of the beginning during the solo, instead with all 4 voices in unison. So he says he presents the 5 notes of the beginning during the solo with all 4 voices in unison, only where it is allowed with a comma. Or he may have set up one or another comma by this means with all diligence. Then G, D, E, or A. And also at changing command in D, A, G, and E. For example, major because the comma on the 5th degree of D. A, G, and then E. Among others, also with the minor third, the black cradle. There are also redoubled ones in it. Or ton 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 or in the last 2 examples, so here, this and this, he has not used unison but has mixed in some full voice texture. I have also heard the following three with inversions, or pa, 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 pam, pam. To be sure, I cannot claim that he has gone from key to key exactly as I've done here, but perhaps in the way that the art of permutation lay on the tip of his pen. Furthermore, although a concerto of this sort may not appear to be quite learned, it seems to me that the repetitions of the internal tuttis or fortes are too many. That the repetitions of the internal tuttis of forte are too many. 1/4 as many would be more than enough for my taste. To be sure, I will also see in time whether it is especially artful always to interject 1 or 2 or 3 measures tuttis into the solo. The concerto takes its name from concertare, which means to contend with one another, also to understand one another, or to thresh out an agreement with each other. That suggests that the middle voices likewise can make their marks in this. The middle voices can make their marks in this. In that respect, most Italians really have written no concerto, since they give the middle voices almost nothing or little to do. I once advanced that idea to an Italian. However, there's a vivace here. However, he came back at me with the following words. I know well that the Germans currently compose in a more thorough fashion than we do. However, there is one thing about this that I must remember. They put more composition into them, while we Italians put in rather more instrument to them. That is, we let the principal voice sound and predominate throughout without converging or hiding it with such copious composition. Accordingly, it is said, even at many German cours, this one or that one was heard in a solo rather than this one or that one was heard in a concerto. The middle voices must only help, support the principal melody, and in this case we use the word composition. Enough. In the end, we still find connoisseurs in every place. Certainly a pure solo, namely one without any accompaniment at all, certainly a pure solo, namely one without accompaniment at all, we no longer have these days at all, except from some capricious hand or galanterie piece. Because I was not capable at the time to maintain the opposite, I have ever since then built on his opinion. I have ever since then built on this opinion for the sake of earning bread. Over time, you can do as you please. Only you should take note that among 12 Italians, there is scarcely one who composed purely and orderly in all respects. Very fun things, eh? That is certainly so in Ubstats. Whatever certain, let's say, Among 12 Italians, there is scarcely one. Today, Italian composers, they compose this kind of music. So this is a new music. So let's say that among 12 Italians, among 112 20 Italians, you can find maybe one which can compose purely and orderly in all respects. This is certainly so in Urbstadt. Whatever a certain consular does well, the other 11 spoil. Thus, one could call a violin solo a concerto, since the bass concertizes with it, or at least helps support it. But what does it have for a tonal order? A violin solo has the same tonal order as a concerto, namely, in general, C, G, A, C. And you already understand this well from what has preceded. In the preceding, I have privately thought, if I met a virtuoso who is able to play single blow only a few notes, I will violently bolster with composition everything that is weak and hopefully throw in long tutti, which will perhaps help both of us. This will not go over in a violin solo. However, which one may begin with an adagio since an allegro at the beginning without a ritornello would perhaps sound too nact. This will not go over into a violin solo. However, no, I have to read this. In the preceding, I have privately thought, if I meet a virtuoso who is able to play single blow only a few notes, I will violently bolster with a composition everything that is weak and helpfully throw in long tuttis, which will perhaps help both of us. This will not go over in a violin solo. However, which one may begin with an adagio since an allegro at the beginning without a ritornello would perhaps sound too naked. If it is really not a rule that the adagio should form the introduction, I have already seen many in which the adagio stands in the middle. Thus one can at will even use another key in the middle for this purpose. I mean occasionally for variety. In the meantime, I know very well that a solo must be aria-like and singing throughout. Shadow and lights are also very well studied to it, namely if here and there a boisterous passage, Rauschender Gang, is inserted in order to stir up the melody, or at least to make it a little more pleasing. I will just quickly write out a brief sample. Let's see. Beginning of the first part. Okay. One boisterous passage, brillante, or in French, brillant, means therefore, among other things, lively, animated. I need two hands. Let's play it again. Do, mi, sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, sol, fa, sol, la, fa, sol, fa, so, mi, re, do, fa, mi, re, re. Pa, 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 poi, fa, di, da, di, fa, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, la, do, ta, da, da. Beginning of the second part. Sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, mi, sol, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, fa, mi, ponte. Do, mi, sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, si, fa, sol, la, fa, mi, re, do, fa, mi, re. And end. Okay. You see well that I have not expanded anything further. I would have thought that boisterous notes would be indispensable so close before the cadence, for they animate it can common. In the meantime, I have come to see that after the second boisterous passage, namely the one in the key of the sixth degree A, you have added 4 singing measures before the cadence, and perhaps for that reason you have annotated them with 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 singing measures, so cantabile singing measures. We are talking about this. Sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, la. Sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, fa. But today you said that 2 similar commas are found only in the case of repetition. But you said that 2 similar commas are found only in the case of a repetition. 2 similar commas are found only in the case of repetition. Yet, at the letter Q, there is a changing comma on the 6th degree. Yes, because A minor, changing comma, this way. A, and the following boisterous passage has a changing comma in the same key at the letter P. Here. Ta-da-dun-dun. Does it have to be that way? It doesn't have to be that way, but it can be that way only once in a while. For that reason, I've written in the letters Q and P next to them. These 2 commas are so different from one another in that the first is unconclusive, right? Because and the second in the low register, while the second one that comes after the boisterous note measure is in the upper register and it's conclusive because it arrives to the first degree, to the octave, let's say, to the octave. Furthermore, the boisterous passage is so completely set apart from the rest of the melody that it is practically perceived as an expanded insertion. However, now I want to set apart this insertion as well. And also 2 tonic commas in succession, because there are here 2 tonic comma in successions. To be sure, the first is conclusive by nature because it reaches the octave. And the second is, on the contrary, unconclusive. And if they were placed even farther apart, they would be even more tolerable in my experience, because the ears would have forgotten the first one. But after the cadence on A, couldn't one have made a transition by means of the fonte? But after the cadence, okay, in my experience, because the ears would have forgotten the first one, okay. But after the cadence on A, couldn't one have made a transition by means of the fonte? 1, 2, 3. E fa la fa mi re do te do ti re do fa re te. Mi fa mi re do ti do re fa mi. This way. So between this and this, there is the fonte. Or finally, couldn't the theme at least be veered a little bit? Mi do so so fa mi fa mi so re fa mi, with the monte mi sol fa mi re mi fa sol fa mi re. without any doubt in many thousand ways. This solo of yours has only 2 parts because of the double bars, and yet you make 3 parts out of it. This solo of yours has only 2 parts because of the double bars, and yet you make 3 parts out of it. Let's see. That is done only for the sake of greater clarity. Look at the first part begins in C, but it has most of its passage and notes in the key of G. The second part begins in G, but has most of its passage in the key of A minor. The last part may begin as it will, although it has most of its passages against the tonic, again in the tonic. Now, if a solo is carried out without regularity and expansion, the first part can actually have 2 boisterous passages. If a solo is carried out without if a solo is carried out with regularity and expansion, the first part can actually have 2 boisterous passages, just as the second part can have 2 boisterous passages, just as the last part can have 2 boisterous passages or migrating passages. Or in the first and second parts overall, there could be only 1, but with 2 in the last part, or even none in the first part and none in the second part, but with 1 or 2 in the last part as one wishes. In short, or in all possible variations, only it is good if the most strongly boisterous passages be reserved for the last part in order to close the whole allegro as impressively as possible. Likewise, an orator or perhaps a preacher saves the strongest argument for last. Only the Italian listeners, according to what I'm told, must be drawn in by having the most impressive passages right away at the beginning. I truly don't know whether their nature have made them so. Let's see. Nevertheless, so 139, whoever does not see that I'm only boasting for the sake of this, whoever does not see that I am only boasting for the sake of the discontent certainly would imagine that I understand this rightly. I split my sides laughing. Nevertheless, when 1 or 2 strongly boisterous passages are found in the second part, it is not entirely necessary that they be as strongly stated in the last part, but rather it can be done as one wishes. The boisterous passages in the first and last parts ought not to be similar to each other, as they are to be seen in my model, but rather completely different migrating notes can be used in the last part, even more strongly than I have shown you before, if desired. The Italians do not pay much attention to that. One sees many violin solos by them in which there are neither strong nor weak boisterous passages anywhere. The Italians do not pay much attention to that. One sees many violin solos by them in which there are neither strong nor weak boisterous passages anywhere. Certainly, it is by means of boisterous passages that each part obtains a body or a belly. But you yourself often say that one should imitate an aria melody with instrument. An aria generally also has its boisterous passages, which mostly consist of running passages. However, for double, close 16th notes are perhaps not performed well by a singer. If the singer can produce or sing them, he will certainly not leave them out. Why shouldn't one sometimes display the powers of an instrument? Nevertheless, one should not use only 16th notes all the time. In fact, in an aria like boisterous passages can sometimes serve just as well. Thus, I will make many variations, now this way, now that way, and rarely will I put not boisterous passage in them. Cadences are stirred up greatly by means of them. By the way, I see an error in your model. In the first part, you have written a transition, which perhaps of necessity can also introduce an antithesis. On the contrary, in the second, or most important, the last part, you have not presented it again, namely this. Okay. And in the next video of this series, we're going to continue analyzing this melody and the following example. So, see you. Now, 5 minutes pause. Okay. Hello Musici, let's continue our journey with Riepel. We stopped at the time here last time at this page, and we have to continue. So, in the first part, I'm reading from this point. In the first part of the last composition, of course, we analyzed that you have written a transition which perhaps of necessity can also introduce an antithesis. On the contrary, in the second, or most importantly, the last part, you have not presented it again, namely this. So this is the section. It does not have to be that way. There is nevertheless enough unity in it. I would almost have said that a melody can now and then be just as flowing when everything is not so precisely circumscribed. I would almost have said that a melody can now and then be just as flowing when everything is not so precisely circumscribed. Here I will also tell you briefly that we have another light and shadow other than the boisterous passage. This, however, is not made by the composer but by the violinist himself while he plays. Here in mezzo, here I mean mezzo forte, in German when I write dolce, okay, mezzo forte dolce. Now a violinist might play similar notes, I mean not just as this, in all the possible variations without the forte piano and or half piano written in it. Some violinists, so this is mezzo forte, forte piano, forte piano. Some violinists, on the other hand, especially in Italy, apply equal strength with the bow throughout. Here too, it comes down to preference. Good, I will observe over time. Which style has more supporters. However, you could have also expanded the boisterous passage in the second part. So that we have a section here in E minor and another in A minor, actually, because that's the fifth degree of A minor and then the fifth degree of D minor. That's why. Or you could have prolonged the cadence with a plus after the boisterous passage. Certainly, haven't I chatted enough with you today concerning the various prolongations? If, however, a boisterous passage in the second part simply acquitted itself better in the key of the third degree, if, however, a boisterous passage in the second part simply acquitted itself in the key of the third degree E, might I then not eliminate the sixth degree A? Yes, indeed, your needless doubt could almost make one irritated. Thus, with your permission, I will slightly prolong the boisterous passage of the last part. Do, mi, sol, sol, fa. So indeed, you're. Wait a moment. Let me see what's happening here. If, however, a boisterous passage in the second part is simply acquitted itself better in the key of the third degree, so E minor, this is the point. E, might I then not eliminate the sixth degree A? Let's see. Monte. Ok. Thus, with your permission, I will slightly prolong the boisterous passage of the last part, so that instead of a single boisterous passage, there is a monte, and then the repetition on G, pom pom, before the last passage. So let's say the expanded boisterous passage is this one. Good. When our Hans Mikkel, for example, composes a concerto or a solo in C major and falls into the key of G, C major, and falls into the key of G, the fifth degree, he holds so tightly to it that nothing can free him from it but the following cadence. I will give you an example. So when our Hans Mikkel, for example, composes a concerto or a solo in C major and falls into the key of G, he holds so tightly to it that nothing can free him from it but in the following cadence. Let's see. Then stuck in G major. Too unbalanced. And he does the same thing in all the rest of the intermediate keys and tonalities, but often only expanded and even further. Now Philip calls the notes from the scene cross onward a Lear passage. This Lear, what does it mean with Lear? Let me see. The meaning Lear, leire, no, layer. Here it is. Lear, lira, ok, the music instrument, the lira, 15.000 lire. Philip is right, and Mikkel perhaps does not know that in the middle one can use all the keys that belong to the tonic, be it the middle section of the short or expanded type, even though the tonic itself must suffer from it for it most often. Philip is right. Hans Mikkel perhaps doesn't know that in the middle one can use all the keys that belong to the tonic. Okay, be it of the short second section, of the short or expanded type, so short or expanded, even though the tonic itself must suffer for it most often. Let's see. Okay. However, I want to present the key of A more clearly for you and the Sing Plus, as a Sing Plus, because here, as you can see, where is the pen? Where is the pen? I lost the pen. Oh, it was here. Okay, on the iPad. Because the transition to A minor is very short. So, fa mi re re do re fa la ma la so fa mi fa pam pam pam. It's very, very short. Now, I want to present the key of A minor more clearly for you at C cross. So this point, as you can see, is longer. So basically, it's talking about this section, which is made longer. And this bar, instead of being preceded by only 3 bars, is preceded by 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 bars now. Yes. Now you should see F. So F major key. Indeed, we can see that here there's a cadence to F with the introduction of the B flat. Fa, sol, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Da, da, Fa, sol, sol, fa, mi, re, do, fa, mi, la, sol, fa, mi, re. And then you can continue. So here we're talking about a monte at the end, where we have the F section, very long, 4 bars, and then followed by another section, 4 bars, which is the monte, so G major. Now you should see E and D. Let's see how many examples are there, just to organize today this video. Okay. I beg you to stop. First part and second part, so we can conclude here or before this passage. Let's see. Now you should see E and E. Do, mi, sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, si, do, ra, fa, mi, re, do, fa, mi, re. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. La, sol, fa, mi, re, do, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, sol, fa, mi, re. Okay, so that we have a transition to E minor, and this happens thanks to the C sharp, D sharp. Okay. The foreman can once again be helped. The foreman, so the fifth degree, can once again be helped when he begins to work. In fact, the steward himself is the last at liberty. Sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, mi, fa, sol, sol, la, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, fa, mi, la, sol, mi, fa, ton, ton. Okay. The steward, the foreman can once again be helped when he begins to work. In fact, the steward himself is the least at liberty. So the foreman here is being helped by the E and D. The D is the assistant, is the errand girl, and E should be the assistant shift, assistant shift. Yes. Then do, mi, sol, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, do, tan, sol, si, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Ta, tan, tan, ta, sol, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Re, mi, la, sol, fa, mi, la, sol, fa, mi. This way. And as you can see, it's very interesting because here we have this section in C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 bars in C major, and now 8 bars in G is the foreman now, but ending with a comma in C, and here with the same comma in C. And so that's why we are missing the 7th ascending lip, this one. But what follows again is the F major, G major, monte, F major and G major, monte, with even one more passage actually in A minor, ending with a changing comma in A minor, this way, which is unconclusive and incomplete. Now we are starting to understand all the reasonment of Riepel. Okay, but up to this point, do all of them rather have the shift med A? That may be, as long as you know that all of them can help each other throughout, either briefly or extensively, as one wishes. For that reason, there would be nothing at all to complain about in Hans Mikkel's Lear passage. If he had introduced and arranged it better, you mustn't let yourself be discouraged by such censorious people. So it, let's say, Lear passage. It behaves generally for that reason like a distress note passage about which I included a remark in the first chapter, on page 39, all the way down in a footnote. It behaves generally for that reason like a distress note passage about which I included a remark in the first chapter, on page 39, all the way down. Okay. Out either 4 out. I therefore to use no keys other than the 3 with the major third C, G, and F, and the 3 with the minor third A, E, and D, except that I may allow the first 3 to be heard at times for a little while with the minor third. I may allow the first 3 of 3, so C, F, and G, to be heard with a minor third. I can certainly satisfy myself forever composing with just 1/6 degree. And now we have these examples. Okay, but we'll continue this from the next point. Let's see. Okay, we can read these two examples at the end, because then there is a complete composition with first and second part. So yes, next. At least they are connected. No, they're connected, because they say, nevertheless, the first example is, in my view, as just good as the last one. So for the next time, the next video, we'll continue from this point, talking about, or better, for this point, talking about if we can use the minor third in those keys where we are supposed to have the major third in the natural scale. So first degree, C major, G major, and F major. So this in the next video.